Well, good evening. Well, hopefully everyone has fared well, including friends and families, after this crazy week that we've had with tornadoes and the impacts of Hurricane Florence. My name is Lisa Butler, and I proudly serve on the board of Needles Eye Ministry. And on behalf of the board and the staff, I'd like to offer a heartfelt welcome to everyone here. With the many things that you could have chosen to do on a Friday evening, we are excited and appreciative that you chose to spend the evening with us. And for those of you who aren't exactly sure what you signed up for, let me assure you that you are in for a treat. You know, we live in a culture where it's not uncommon to compartmentalize our work life from our spiritual life. It can be difficult to apply our ideals, our Christian ideals, which are often very black and white, to the world of business and free markets, which can easily get us into the gray. But tonight, with the help of Dr. Ken Barnes, we have an opportunity to begin looking at the perils and the promises of capitalism from a uniquely evangelical Christian perspective. So get excited. But before we get started with our evening, please join me in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, as I look around this room, I am inspired and encouraged to see so many talented men and women from the marketplace who are also people of faith. We have come here seeking understanding, and we ask that you would prepare our hearts and minds to receive your wisdom through Dr. Barnes's words. We are grateful for this beautiful venue, the hospitality of the staff, and the hands that have prepared this wonderful meal that we're about to enjoy. May this food nourish us so that we can continue to work in such a way that reflects your love, justice, courage, and moderation for the common good of all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please feel free to keep eating, but I would ask for your attention as I have the opportunity to thank a couple people and give us some brief instructions about the evening. My name is Jordan Maroon. I work for Needles Eye Ministries as Director of Small Groups and Operations. The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. So said Mr. Winston Churchill, never one to mince words. We're here this evening to talk about the extraordinary benefits of capitalism that we are thrilled to enjoy, and also some of the vices and the challenges that we must face and overcome if indeed it is to be redeemed. And so we're thrilled that you joined us, and we think that you're really going to benefit greatly from our speakers this evening. So I'm going to offer some thank yous, and then I'll introduce our executive director, and we'll move forward with the program. First and foremost, I want to thank Dr. Ken Barnes and Barry Duvall, our speakers for the evening, for offering their time and their insight and their experience. Why don't we give them a warm thank you? We're very thankful to our generous gold and silver sponsors and friends of Needles Eye who made this event possible. We're thankful to Dr. Barnes' employers, the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and the Mockler Center for Faith and Ethics in the Workplace who made Ken available to travel from the Boston area down to be with us today. And in the bag that was in the seat as you entered and sat down, you're going to find a number of things from our sponsors. You'll also find a copy of Ken's book, Redeeming Capitalism. And at the end of the evening, you'll also have the opportunity out through these doors if you want to purchase additional copies, or perhaps you'll have the opportunity to ask Ken to further personalize the book if you so choose. We're really thankful to the staff of the Jefferson and Jimmy Harris. They're always wonderful to work with. Really appreciate you all that are in the room and those who are helping us right now. Yeah. Thank you to Kate Winston, who's our photographer tonight, and James Lee, wherever he is, who's our videographer tonight. We really appreciate them. And I want to say a thank you to my colleagues, the Needles Eye staff, who work tirelessly to make this happen. They've done a great job, and yeah. And finally, I really want to thank those of you for whom this is your first Needles Eye event. and you're kind of taking a risk, come to see what we're all about. Thank you for coming and seeing who we are. We think that you'll really enjoy this. You know, earlier this evening during the reception, some of us, my wife and I, and some friends were standing and talking, and Dr. Barnes, who's going to be speaking to us in a minute, came forward to talk to us, and everyone introduced themselves, and about a minute into the conversation, my wife said, "Wait a minute, you're Ken Barnes, you're a big deal." And if that's, I thought that was going to be funnier to you all, but it wasn't. Okay, that's fine. If that's you, if you're thinking, you know, I've heard so many great things like my wife had about this Dr. Barnes or about Barry Duvall, and I guess I'll come hear them, I really want to tell you you're in for a treat. I had the opportunity to hear both Barry and Ken speak within the last 12 months and have always learned a lot from these gentlemen, and I'm just thrilled that we have the opportunity to do that this evening. So thank you for coming and being with us. If you invited friends or colleagues, we really appreciate that as well. And so now, as our founder and president and executive director, Buddy Childress, comes forward, I want to draw your attention real quickly to the response card that's in the middle of your program. So right in the middle of your program, there's a response card. And at the end of the evening, Buddy is going to draw your attention back to that card. So I just don't want you to lose track of it. Make sure you know where that is. You may even want to start filling it out here in the next couple minutes. And I'm also going to mention that we will have a Q&A segment, as you might imagine, later in the evening with both Barry and Ken. So if questions come to mind as they're speaking, you may want to jot those down. There's actually a notes page within your program where you could take a couple notes. There's some pins within the bag from some of our sponsors as well. So I'm going to turn things over to our executive director, Buddy Childress, but thank you all so much for being with us.
Good job, man. Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. I want to also add my appreciation and gratitude to our sponsors, certainly to our team. Jimmy Harris, are you anywhere around here? Well, staff of the Jefferson, please pass along my appreciation to Jimmy and to all of you as well. Also want to acknowledge the fact that Congressman David Bratt is with us. David, thank you for being here tonight. And the reason I introduced him was not because he's a congressman, but he's a former faculty member at my alma mater at Randolph-Macon. Stop it, Doug. Got a lot of Hampton-Sydney guys here tonight. So let me begin my introduction this way of my dear friend Ken Barnes, and I need to get that light on. You can read a very impressive bio on both of our speakers in the program, so I'm not going to mention many of those things. I might mention one or two. I will also mention that I need Jimmy Harris to fix this light. Hopefully it'll get straight soon. But I want to add a couple of personal notes to my introduction. So let me begin with regard to Ken by asking you if you've ever known anyone who has a 25-year experience with multi-billion-dollar corporations at the top level of business as an executive, senior executive, and have at the same time 3 masters and a doctorate in theology. Raise your hand if you know anyone like that. This is what this gentleman has done. He holds the chair, the Michael Phillips Professorship of Workplace Theology and Business Ethics at my seminary, Gordon Conwell. He's also director of the Mockler Center for Faith and Ethics in the workplace at Gordon Conwell. Ken has lived in Central Virginia for a period of a couple years back in the 90s. When he came to Richmond, I had a call from the school, and they said, we have a student, a business guy, who's taken a master's degree. He's coming to Richmond. Can you do 2 things for him? Can you get him plugged in with a business that can provide him an internship for his dissertation? And can you tell him where to live? Sure. So Ken calls me. I think we had coffee. And so we got to the conversation. Well, buddy, where do you think I should live? I said, Ken, I can answer that for you right now. And his wife was working in Northern Virginia, went into D.C. a lot, and he was going to be in Richmond. So I told him this. I said, Ken, you do not want to live 1 foot north of Fredericksburg. And that's where he landed, right in Fredericksburg. And apparently it was a good experience for him. When you read the book, and I hope you all will soon, I think you will agree with what I'm about to say. I don't think I know anyone who has the command of 4 disciplines like Ken Barnes: business, economics, history, and theology. I caught myself, and Laura heard me more than once, reading the book and saying, I cannot believe he's tying this together. His command of these disciplines is incredible, which makes the book rich, but also brings me to the point that I'm so excited about because of necessity and the timeliness of what we're about to hear and where we are in our culture. Personally, this is a personal belief, and I sincerely believe this. I think that what Ken has to say in Redeeming Capitalism more than likely is one of the primary principles of God's answer to the incivility and division within our culture today. I really believe that. And as you listen to him and as you read the book, I think you'll begin to see it as well. This is a timely message from a man who absolutely loves Christ, loves his word, knows and probably forgets more about business than some of us have had to deal with over the last week or month or year. And I think he is here in Richmond. I am so thankful to have him here. And I think he's written this book for such a time as this. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you help me welcome Dr. Ken Barnes?
Well, good evening. It is a joy to be here. Thank you so much, Buddy. I could go on about my friendship with Buddy. I won't. If we have time together one-on-one or tomorrow, those of you who come to the conference, I'll be happy to tell you how much I love this guy and how I'm in awe at what he's done in just over 40 years here in Richmond. I want to thank him. I want to thank Jordan and the rest of the Needle's Eye team. And I want to thank Gordon Conwell for allowing me to be here. I've got cousins and in-laws here that came to visit as well. Thank you so much for coming. But mostly I want to thank all of you for taking time out on a Friday night. I am sure somewhere there's a college football game being played tonight that some of you would rather be watching than being here. So I want to thank all of you for coming. I'm really looking forward to what Barry has to say because Barry read the book. And I say that because for the last few months, I've done a lot of radio interviews and recently did a nationwide television interview, but I was with my agent and we were driving the day of the TV interview, and he asked me, he said, so how are you enjoying these radio interviews? And I said, I'll be honest with you. I said, it's really frustrating when they don't read the book. And he said, well, how do you know whether or not they read the book? And I say, if the first question is, so Ken, was Jesus a socialist? I know they haven't read the book. So we got to the TV station, and this host, a very well-known national figure, came up to me in the green room and said, I love what you're doing. This is the most important message you could. I'm so happy you're here. This is great. We get in the studio, I get introduced, and he says, so Ken, Jesus was a socialist, wasn't he? And I thought, he didn't read the book. So I hope you get a chance to read it. I've been blessed with some wonderful reviews from Publishers Weekly and Christianity Today and some other publications. But I got to go back to Oxford, where I taught for many years at Oxford University this summer, and they had a Redeeming Capitalism conference. And I was embarrassed, frankly, by how wonderful these senior economists and theologians and business people were, what they were saying about the book. And I turned to a colleague and I said, I feel like I'm at my own funeral. And she said, your kids probably won't be this nice. But perhaps the most interesting review I read about the book was on Amazon, because a guy said, Ken Barnes started to write a very good book. And then I make a passing reference to the effect on the environment of economic activity, and he said, he's clearly a European liberal in disguise. And I thought, how could he hear my French accent through that book? I just didn't understand. But the real question, as Buddy said, is this a timely book? That's the question I had to ask myself. Is this a timely book to talk about redeeming capitalism? And I thought it was. And then 2 days ago, the president said on national TV, and I quote, "We have the strongest economy ever." And I thought, who knew? The strongest economy. Then I thought, he does have a bit of a proclivity for exaggeration. So maybe it's not the greatest economy ever. So maybe the book is still timely. But there's an awful lot about the economy that is good. And we need to celebrate those things. But here's the problem. When you get into a discussion about the health of the economy, what matters most really is what metrics are you using to measure it. So for instance, if I said to you, hey, how would you like to invest in the stock of a company that has had 55 consecutive weeks of profits, they're the fourth largest in their industry, they're a multi-billion-dollar concern, would you like to invest in that company? You might say, yeah, 55 consecutive weeks of profits, absolutely. And that was the case with Lehman Brothers right before they went bust. Their P&L account looked great, but their balance sheet had a problem. Or if I said to you, hey, I heard you work for this company, and they have unprecedented sales, profits, acquisitions. They're the leader in their field. Everybody's talking about it. You should take all of your pension plan, and you should convert your entire pension plan to that company's stock. Would you do it? At Enron, a lot of people did. The P&L account looked great, but there was a big problem with the balance sheet. And so when we talk about economics and how the economy is doing, remember that it's good that the GDP is growing. It's good that unemployment is low. But GDP is a little bit like our P&L account. And we have to be honest about what's happening to the balance sheet. The growth that we've experienced in the last year, largely the result of a tax cut, has added about $500 billion to our economy. That's good news. However, we're staring down the barrel of $1 trillion deficit. That would be like the CEO of a company saying, hey everybody, I added $500 million to our P&L account. Pay no attention to the fact that I took $1 billion off the balance sheet. And this administration is not the first to do it. I'm sure not picking on this administration. If you look at what has happened to the American economy since 2008, since the global financial crisis, we have added $4 trillion to the gross domestic product, but we have taken $14 trillion off the balance sheet through national debt and quantitative easing. That is a fact that we can't ignore. It gets even worse when you look at the long-term history. I'm about to host a conference at Bretton Woods, the site of the famous Bretton Woods meeting in 1944, where the world decided how it was going to conduct business after World War II. At that time, the United States was the world's largest creditor nation. And listen to this. We possessed 3/4 of the entire world's monetary gold. And the whole world was on the gold standard. Today, we are the world's largest debtor nation. And all the gold in Fort Knox would only pay the interest on our national debt for 6 months. So, that, in my opinion, is a problem. And it's part of a bigger problem. Because when we think about capitalism, we go into our tribes. And it's as though you either are pro-capitalist or you're anti-capitalist, when in fact economics is much more complex than that. I tell people economics is a little bit like whack-a-mole. You do something over here and something pops up over here. We got to be a little bit more pragmatic, because as someone who spent his life creating wealth, remember, I'm a capitalist. The title of the book is Redeeming Capitalism, Not Replacing Capitalism. I want to make that clear. But I'm also a little bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper, because I saw the good of capitalism when I traveled all over the world and built factories and built businesses and employed people. But I also saw the bad and the ugly of capitalism. So when we talk about the good of capitalism, let's celebrate the good. The fact that throughout history, since the era of capitalism began, wealth globally has grown at twice the rate of population growth. That's because of capitalism. There was just an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal that less than 1 billion people, for the first time since 1990, less than 1 billion people on this planet live on less than $2 a day. We've reduced global poverty by 72% because of capitalism. And by every material measure, longevity, health care, education, arts, sciences, you name it, life is better because of capitalism. And we should never be ashamed or afraid to make that claim. But we also can't ignore the bad. Because while we have less than 1 billion people on $2 a day, we still have hundreds of millions of people on less than $2 a day. While we've reduced poverty by 72% since 1990, in that same period of time, the number of billionaires has increased by 2,000%. And that concentration of wealth is a serious concern. Don't take my word for it. Plato spoke against it. The Tao spoke against it. The Old Testament prophets spoke against it. Jesus spoke against it. We have to be honest about these anomalies in our system. And then the ugly is very ugly. The corporate scandals, I mentioned already Lehman Brothers and Enron, I could go on, Volkswagen, Rolls-Royce, the LIBOR scandal, I mean, they are legion. And what happens is people see those things and they start to ask hard questions about this system we believe in. And of course, the debt and trade wars and greed generally. And here's the thing that we have to overcome. Here's the myth I want to dispel. There is a very common myth, especially among those of us who love capitalism and believe in capitalism. And that is that the bad and the ugly is simply the price we pay for the good. Nonsense. Here's why. When I was writing this book, I came to a very, very important conclusion about capitalism. If you don't remember anything else I say tonight, remember this. Capitalism is a subject, not an object. Capitalism is a subject, not an object. It doesn't possess what we call hypostasis in the theological world. There is no personality trait endemic to it. It's not an artificial construct. There is no central agency behind it. Capitalism is nothing more than the cumulative effect of countless individual and corporate choices made in a system that is highly monetized, lightly regulated, and built on free markets. That's all capitalism is. That means two things. One, it doesn't have a moral compass of its own. It will reflect the morality and the ethics, or the lack thereof, of the cultures in which it operates. And the second is this. The capitalism we have is the capitalism we've chosen. If we want a more virtuous form of capitalism, if we want a capitalism with all of the wealth creation possibilities of the capitalism we have, but without the excesses, without the scandals, without the inequalities that bring shame on it, not because we expect equality across the board, we don't. Inequality is a natural part of the system. But when inequality becomes the hyper-concentration of wealth, and working people aren't able to get ahead because wages and things of that nature aren't keeping up in inflation, we hurt ourselves. And in the book I talk about how Adam Smith, of all people, warned us. And he said, if you want good capitalism, make sure that the people at the bottom are getting more than just what it takes to survive. And Adam Smith, by the way, was writing from the UK. And you know what he pointed to as his example? Capitalism in America. He said to the people in the UK, look at the way Americans do capitalism. They do it right. He said because Americans are willing to take a little bit less in profits to ensure that everybody in the channel participates fully. And it's good economic sense. Why? Because all the boats rise with the tide, and you're creating your own future customers. And you won't have the cynicism that you have today. This is the single greatest threat to capitalism today. It's cynicism about it. Harvard recently did a study. 19% of millennials self-identify as capitalist. 58% say they would prefer to live in a socialist country. Let me tell you something. If we don't redeem capitalism, we're going to hate what replaces it. So, in the book, I look at 3 epochs, and I ask, how do we get here? The first epoch is the traditional capitalism that Adam Smith observed, and guess what? It was built on an Enlightenment version of Judeo-Christian values. And here's a shock to a lot of people. Unless you're an economist, you might not know this. Economics has not always been a mathematical modeling science. For most of history, it was a social science. In fact, it was a moral science. Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. His first work, Moral Sentiments, sets the ground rules for wealth of nations. And then there was another era, unique to America, that Max Weber wrote about, called the era of the Protestant ethic. In the late 19th, earliest 20th century, America was doing better than the rest of the world economically. And you know why? Because it was rooted in this kind of neo-puritanical view of life. And he called it this worldly asceticism of Calvinism. And he said, these people don't believe in compartmentalizing their lives. These people are like the Dutch theologian, Abraham Kuyper, who said, there is not 1 square inch in all of creation over which Christ is sovereign that he does not claim mine. And so the industrialists of that era didn't believe the purpose of a business was just to make as much money as possible. They believed the purpose of a business was to glorify God and to provide human flourishing around them. That's why so much of the philanthropy that we still enjoy today, Carnegie Foundation and others, were built in that period. But Max Weber was quite prescient. And Max Weber said, if America ever loses its moral groundings in 2 or 3 generations, you will have a very different kind of capitalism. You will have an economic engine that creates wealth, but without any moral constraint. He was right. That's the third epoch I describe in the book, and I call it postmodern capitalism. I call it postmodern because it is devoid of a moral compass and resistant, if not impervious, to ethical constraint. And it is that capitalism that the millennials look at and they say, well, maybe something else is better. Well, in the book, I have a whole chapter on Karl Marx and another whole chapter on Bernie Sanders and other people who think like Bernie Sanders, in which I say, look, the utopian solutions don't work. The utopian solutions are fool's gold. But we still have to fix the system we have, or it will turn on us. And here's the good news. We can do it. We can do it. Even though we don't have the religious hegemony they may have had in previous generations, we can do it because we have 3 tools at our disposal that we can use in this project of redeeming capitalism. 1, common grace. God is sovereign of all, even sovereign over those people who don't know it. And God has created us all in his image. And if God wants human flourishing, all we have to do is to harmonize the imago Dei with the missio Dei, the image of God with the mission of God. And we can do it even if we live in a postmodern, post-Christian society. Why? Because we have something else that is common to all human beings, and that is an innate knowledge of virtue. People know the difference between right or wrong. We didn't need the 10 Commandments to tell us not to kill our neighbors. People know. And here's the thing about virtue. It's out of fashion because we have bought into the ethical egoism of all that matters is looking after me. All that matters is what's good for me is good. And that is directly opposite from what we believe to be true as Christians. So we can bring prudence and courage and justice and temperance back into economics because everybody knows in their heart of hearts that we need them. And we have something else that we claim as our own. We call them the theological virtues, but guess what? They're just as common as the other virtues. And we call them faith, hope, and love. So the rally cry of my book is, people of faith, use your faith. Bring your faith into the marketplace. Show people that you are different than the world. Show people that you do not buy into this ethical egoism. Because guess what? Economics can't work without faith. Our monetary system is a faith-based system. Make no mistake about it. That piece of paper in your pocket with a picture of a dead president, it's just a piece of paper. But you have faith that it will get you goods and services if you present it. And what does faith do? Faith breeds hope. And again, we can't have a capitalist system without hope, because why do people invest? Why do people take risk with their assets? In the hope that they'll get a return. And when I talk to millennials, you know what they say to me? We don't have any hope in capitalism. We don't have any faith in capitalism. We're saddled with debt. After going to college, we were told we'd get a good job and we'd be successful, and we're working at McDonald's 3 years after graduation. And we still are saddled with debt. But we notice that a lot of people are making a lot of money. It ain't us. We need to bring hope. And the only way to do that is by exercising that last and most important virtue. Love. Love. We need to bring love back into capitalism. And love is not the mawkish emotion on greeting cards. That's not the love I'm talking about. We as Christians know how the Bible defines love. And it's not with a word, it's with a symbol. And that symbol is the cross. The greatest act of love ever. Because love is about selflessness. It's about the great loving the needy. So, as I say at the very end of the book, it's a can-do book, not a how-to book. I do have 2 chapters on how to redeem capitalism from the bottom up and the top down. You have to come to the conference tomorrow if you want that. But here's the really good news. Not only, that's my timer, and I'm just about to wrap up, so I did that right. Here's the good news. There is no quick fix, but we didn't get here quickly. So this is more of a mission than a project. It's more of a journey than a destination. It really is not, my book is not a manifesto for a movement. It's a credo for a community of people who refuse to believe that God is incapable of redeeming this thing called capitalism. And that's why I wrote the book. To invite you all on that journey out of the desert of postmodern capitalism into the promised land of redeemed, virtuous capitalism. Thank you.